Before I do launch into talking about myself and my work, I would like to address Ivan, if that's okay, and to respond to your welcome to land Gur Mayagat. And thank you from my people and through me. But I would also like to say, from someone who comes from the social work profession, because the social work profession was involved in the colonisation of your people and what happened to your families, I'm sorry, on behalf of my profession. And as someone who's Irish, and the Irish people would have been here as well, and so on behalf of the Irish people, if some of my people were involved in that as well, I'd like to say sorry. Dabron Macarja. Okay. So, the background to my work and how come I'm standing in front of you today. My ancestry is Irish. It's Belfast Irish. There's a particular reason why I anchor myself in the Belfast Irish ancestry when I'm talking about the issues of violence within families, because I was born under a barbed wire fence in the shadow of a gunman. So from a very, very early age, I learned to the core of my being what violence does to the soul and to the heart and to the body of its people. And I chose at the age, the mighty age of about 12, 13 or 14 to become a pacifist in a war zone. Interesting. We got to go to various peace gatherings and peace communities, and of course as a teenager it got nothing to do with the fact there was boys and girls there. It was purely political, my motivations at that point in my life, purely political. But that was the beginning of my knowing around my relationship with violence and wanting to be something different to that energy. I certainly know the power of colonisation and what it does to families and what it does to peoples. So that was also very much part of my upbringing. Then I chose to serve my community as a social worker. And that started when I was about 21. I'm now 51, so 30 years later. While I've left one of my great loves, which is the land of Ireland, I certainly haven't left my second great love, which is social work. Now at this point, my two sons would say, no ma, we're your second love. Your work's your third love, so I better just mention that. So I can, in case they somehow see this recording. My very first social work placement at the age of 21, I had the power of the state to remove children at the age of 21, and I knew a lot about that then. Gosh, one of my very first home visits, knock on the door, and to this woman who brought me in, had a conversation with me about what was happening in her family. Those were the days you did public transport, so I jumps back on the number 10 bus to go back to the office, to which my social work placement supervisor calls me into his office. So from me leaving the home to getting there, she'd phoned him and said, she's very nice. And she's very kind, and she's probably very compassionate, but I don't think she'll be able to help us because my husband's so violent. Very first placement. My last placement, 2 years later, was a community work placement in West Belfast. And then West Belfast had third world status because of its poverty. And there was a very strong military presence on the streets of Belfast. And I was working in a community centre with women for social action. And I remember one of the conversations where this woman proudly, I will never forget, she was about that size. I have this thing, all Belfast women are about this size. And they're built, particularly Belfast grandmothers. They're that size and they're built like that, and you don't mess about with them, I'll tell you that much. Anyway, I remember the incredible pride when we were doing the sharing circle with women, when she talked about how her achievement was that she had managed to get the beatings down to only about once a month and not in front of the children. And here was this kind of enthusiastic social worker who, thank God, kept her mouth shut at that moment in time. Because what I wanted to say was, you can just leave him, blah, 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 blah. But thankfully, there was some other wisdom standing beside me. Well, I didn't. I listened. And I noticed her, and I will use words like pride, and her sense of self, and what she had done. Now, that's over 30 years ago, and I still hear people talk about domestic violence as a women's issue, women's issues, and this thing about women either should leave or should know how to choose. And the more we keep talking about that, the more that we do not give voice to the incredible ethics and principles and beliefs that holds those women. So those were two incredibly great teachers of mine 30 odd years ago. Then I did child protection in London. We mixed tend to do that. We'd pop over the pond for a while, so we did. And I was a Thatcher baby snatcher. That was my claim to fame, I know. I didn't last there very long, so I didn't, that's for sure. And surprise, surprise, what was one of my first child protection call-outs? Domestic violence. Now, those of you young things are probably looking at me and going, yeah, domestic violence is a child protection issue. It wasn't then. It did not exist as a child protection issue 30 years ago. So this relationship I have wasn't just the conversation with Maria last year. This is a 30-year relationship in the profession of noticing this issue. And maybe I'm just a bit slow, but it just keeps tapping me on the shoulder. So it does. Tap, 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 tap. Popped over the other side of the world to your beautiful country and continued working here in child protection, but more those of you who know my therapeutic work. But about 12, 13, 14 years ago was definitely the start of this conversation I'm having with you, when I had to do a consult with multiple agencies. So there was health and docs and NGOs, etc. And I noticed they were talking about, so the case that was to be presented, well, again, it was a case where there was violence in the home by the male partner, and each one of the organisations at some point had worked with this man in a different family. And it was at that point I thought, enough. Like, enough. We have to stop handing the violent baton on to the next, to the next, to the next. And so I chose to do something about it and went and got myself, I read and read and read, and I've been trained under the lovely Alan Jenkins, whose name will be mentioned hopefully a lot, and started to have conversations with my peers. Not a popular thing to do, which Eric and I talk about 10 or 12 years ago, not popular at all. Some of the most distressful moments I would have had in my professional career would have been when I suggested that we need to have conversations with men who use violence against their female partners. So the next part of the timeline was about 8 years ago, where the Department of Community Services invited me to write a training package, because what their Brighter Futures teams were coming back and saying to them was the biggest issue that we're dealing with in the families, in the homes, is men who use violence, and no one had trained them. No one. We were sending out our frontline workers to knock on doors and to work with the most difficult families with absolutely no training. And I know some of you are in the room and you do incredibly honourable work, no matter what the media says. Incredibly honourable work, and at the time very little training. So the agency that we all like to have a good complaint about was the first agency here in New South Wales to start to grapple this issue and want to train their workers on men who use violence in the home. And this is where I got the pleasure to work with this gentleman here, who I've known for a long, long time after that. So that's how Eric and I started doing that gig, and then met Maria. And her and I had a conversation about how can we keep the conversation going. So that's my timeline. That's what got me standing in front of you today. It's a very, very clear timeline, the professional timeline. What lies behind the chronological facts of my journey are my beliefs. So I was thinking about, when I was putting this all together today, and I thought, well, I have to start with my beliefs of why would Mary Jo McVeigh think this would be an important issue to talk about, why she would like to invite her colleagues into talking about it. And so I started looking at my beliefs, and surprise, surprise, big surprise to myself, I found one of the beliefs behind my works was political. Very unusual for somebody from Northern Ireland who was brought up in a left-wing working class family. Politics, there you go. And when I was thinking about the political beliefs behind the work I do, I noticed, and in all the beliefs, I noticed I kept hearing three kind of parts to it, or three themes, and I kept hearing in my head, children, women, men, children, women, men. We Irish love three. You know, oh my God, everything's a secret three, the three this, the shamrock, everything's three, so why not continue with the very theme of three? So you're going to notice the theme of three, children, women, men. And so obviously for me, the political part of working with men who use violence in the home is a child protection issue. And I don't really think I'm going to leave that to anybody in this room. And child protection is a political issue. It's not a mental health issue for children, despite the fact that we restrain their bodies with chemicals because of the effect of violence. It is indeed a political issue because of what adults who abuse their power, particularly adults who have the social contract to love and honour, abuse their power. So I think, folks, that's political, not small p, big, massive P. By the way, I forgot to warn you, I sometimes bring soapboxes with me. And I think I've just stepped on one there. So I just think I did. Anyway, so from the political framework, it's a child protection issue, as well as a human rights issue. And again, I know the effects of violence on women is their health issue, but it's not, again, the health issue. It is a human rights issue, as far as I'm concerned, around every one of us deserves to live a life free of violence, to express ourselves in whichever way we want, to express ourselves and not to live in fear of that expression being oppressed by someone else's actions or words or beliefs. And part of that politicisation for me around for the effects of violence on women is a issue of colonisation, two colonisations. I think the first colonisation is the colonisation of violence. And what the colonisation of violence again does to the heart and the soul and the body of a person who's been invaded by the abusive power of another. And this is an incredible landscape we have, this body of ours, this wonderful community, this physical community and landscape that carries us through life. And when you're being abused in all those different ways, it certainly is a colonisation of your sense of who you are. And of course, then there's the colonisation of the country as well. And I'm going to leave Ivan. I've noted it, and I'm going to leave you, Ivan, to discuss that further, if that's okay. And then the kind of, I haven't even got halfway down page 1, Maria. Oh my God, you'd be able to keep me on track time-wise. And then the political stuff as well. It's like we got to think wider too around women who haven't got access to resources. So those basic issues of poverty and class and regional and simple stuff like transport, you know, to and from places where they need help. So again, I'm thinking of the political from the small, the personal and the body, right through to the entire community. Because it is a social issue. It's not just for us professionals. I mean, we'll talk about it for us professionals, but every single one of us should be shouting from a mountaintop that it's not okay. I was at dinner a couple of weeks ago, chatting to some women, and one woman, I don't know how the conversation started, but one woman said she was somewhere with some friends, and they heard a woman screaming and shouting out, and the woman who spoke to me turned around to her friend and said, "Do you think we should phone the police?" To which the other woman said, "No, someone else will have done so." Now, all of us know in the room that we can't wait for someone else to do so. So when we think of it as a political issue, it certainly is for me an issue in societal. Surprise, surprise for the second one, being Irish, being political. My second belief around violence against women is as a spiritual issue. Today is an interesting feast day today. These are remnants from my Irish Catholic upbringing. Long after I left the confines of that particular spirituality, I didn't leave behind all the wisdom. And today is the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi. And amongst things that Francis said and gave to this world, he said, Make me an instrument of your peace. Where there's hatred, let me sow love. Where there's injury, pardon. Not bad words, so many hundreds of years later, to remind us, will certainly remind me of one of the main elements to my work is the sense of the spirit and what violence does around spirituality. When we think of the spirit of our children, here comes the three. Gilbran, a lovely Sufi poet, reminds us of our children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them their love, but not your thoughts, for they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls, for their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow. So violence against women and children is violence against the spirit of tomorrow, the hope of tomorrow, where we're going in tomorrow, which way in this room it doesn't belong to us. That's what we're handing on. And do we want to hand on a legacy of violence to the spirit of tomorrow? I don't know. Perhaps not. When I think of the spiritual element in violence against women, I certainly think of women as the sacred body. And from my Celtic ancestry, we acknowledged that the female body was a temple of the next generation. And when Christianity arrived in Ireland, they smashed up a lot of the female sacred sites, which happened to be built to represent the womb and the female body. And when you entered those, you entered into the sacredness of the temple of the next generation. When a woman's body is being violated, I believe that the whole spirit of an entire people is also being violated. And when you think of the statistics of when women are pregnant and how they're targeted for violence even more, I think it's doubly horrifying to think about that. And connecting the sacred body to sacred land, which we did in our country, and I know it's the same here. There was a beautiful poet and songwriter at home who talked about that when we look at how we're burning and raping Mother Earth, the land, with our mining and our logging, it's the same that we do to female body. So again, I cannot separate the abuse that we are perpetrating on the female body to the abuse that we're perpetrating here on the planet that carries us. And then there's the sacred masculine, which I cannot speak of because it's not my spirituality. However, Gerard Manley Hopkins, a great poet and mystic, reminds us all, in the lines of this poem, each mortal thing does one thing and the same, deals out that being indoors, each one dwells, self. Go itself. Myself, it speaks and spells, crying, what I do is me, for that I came. Gerard Manley Hopkins reminds us, for what I do is me, for that I came, that we all came to be together, that within the nature of who we all are is who we are, and part of that is the masculine. In the masculine sacred is also the feminine sacred. And when you violate the sacred code of the body of another, you're also violating the very sacred code of who you are and that interconnectedness. And while I honour the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine, we have to start more and more honouring the connection between the both. Because separate, we get separate, but we also should focus on together. And I'll let St. Francis of Assisi again, unknown, maybe to many, his Peace Chronicle might be known, but I don't know if many knew that he also talked about the sacred feminine and the sacred masculine. And I've just summarised one of his very long chronicles, but he talked about, praise be for all your creatures, especially brother sun. Praise be, Sister Moon. In the heavens you made them bright, precious and fair. Praise be, Brother Wind, Sister Water, Brother Fire, Sister Mother Earth, who sustains and governs us all. So St. Francis got it a couple of hundred years ago. The feminine and the masculine sacred are extremely important. And so that's, I think, violence as a spiritual issue, just, a little tiny look into it as a spiritual issue. And of course, it's a clinical issue. Let's see what I find in the clinical, which again, my assumption that a lot of you will know some of the stuff, so just took a little smorgasbord of some of it. And again, I'll look at children, women and men. The finding from our child death reports and community services file reviews, and from feedbacks with caseworkers in the field, and certainly my long relationship with them, show that domestic violence is posing one of the greatest risks to our children here. When O'Hagan and Diligent Berm did a review of the child death reports in Britain, they found the following. Violent men consistently dominated the 35 inquiry reports produced since 1974. How long are we going to wait? Anyway. And have, with few exceptions, been responsible for the deaths of children in those reports. 1974. So, I reckon a crossroads is right before us. I reckon in this point in time, I am not, I'm very mindful actually of being in this room at this point in time, because people think history is kind of a big thing that hits the newspapers. Well, his story and her story are happening here today, I reckon. In the fact that we're starting to gather, and perhaps by our mere presence, irregardless of what's produced at the end of the day, the presence of us in this room is saying no more to those stats since 1974. It's time for change.